Welcome to Manna in the Morning, presented by TITUS Camp.
I'm Sprague, and I'm glad to be asked to be part of a Manna in the Morning, presented by TITUS Camp. When I was thinking about what I would discuss, I thought that most likely, if you're watching this video, you're interested in training, in service, and leadership in some regard, and I wanted to provide something that would give you a period of devotion, encouragement, some tools for enrichment in your own study and preparation for teaching. And I wanted to look at one of my favorite illustrations of leadership, and that is shepherding. Whenever we look at Scripture, we see throughout physical, literal shepherds, and we see God referred to as a shepherd, and we see that his leaders are even talked about as shepherds. Sometimes as kings come from shepherds, he requires his elders of the church to have capacities like shepherds, and their work is even referred to as shepherding. And so I wanted to look at the shepherd's psalm, Psalm 23, some things that we can learn from it, give some ideas about outlines and teaching of it, and hopefully leave you with some encouragement today. When we look at Psalm 23, it's a psalm of about 127 words. There are 28 references in those 127 words to God directly or to the psalmist directly. So 22% of the words are personal, directed to or about God and about the person who's writing it. And whenever we study as leaders and teachers, we need to be sure that we're studying in a way where we are taking it personally. And when I'm looking at this psalm, I wanted to introduce a method of study, a way to look at some things from different perspectives to make sure that we stay fresh and we're not always looking at things the same way. And it might be best illustrated when you look at Jesus' life, for instance. You have Jesus, the good guy, right? And then you have the bad guys, unbelieving Jews, for instance. And you have those who are with Jesus as disciples who might be confused. And when we see an instance in Jesus' life, are we looking at it from the perspective of Jesus, who is always right, and he's teaching and he knows better? If we're not careful, we might always look from Jesus' perspective, and we might not look from the disciples' perspective where we say, maybe I don't always get it. Maybe I can learn something from this. And there's value in looking at the enemy's perspective. Do I ever act like that? I need to be sure that I'm not putting on these kind of the airs that the Pharisees were putting on, and that I'm not blinding myself to the truth because I've already predetermined what it is that I'm going to see. So look at things from different perspectives. And whenever you're looking at Psalm 23, I would encourage you could perhaps devotionally look at it by saying, I'm going to emphasize the Lord as I'm reading through it. And so it goes something like, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. And whenever you're emphasizing those aspects, what you're pulling out of that's presented here is the sovereignty of God, the care of God. And whenever we flip it and say, how about I emphasize the psalmist, the I, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He guides me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. There's an intimacy, personalness there, an individual accountability to God that we could carry throughout the psalm. You might outline the psalm like this. Verses 1 through 3 are talking about God as being the pastor. It is shepherd, and to shepherd is to pasture. And that might give you an opportunity to talk about the use in the New Testament and how whenever we look at the word, yes, it might generally be used to talk about anyone who's doing some kind of shepherding. But as far as the office of pastor, the office of a shepherd, bishop, elder, presbyter, we see Acts chapter 20, verse 28, draws all those together. Titus 1, 1 Timothy chapter 3, regard those as being only those people who fulfill those characteristics are recognized in that office. You look at God as the shepherd, the pastor, and if he is your shepherd, we see the psalmist recognizes that he's content. He can be content because he's following. Next, in verse 4, you see that God is the protector, his rod and his staff. He's the protector, and the psalmist can be secure because he's following. You can keep that following each time. The first following could be he has submitted himself. The second following could be because he trusts in God's care, so he's following. And then in this third part, you could look at verses 5 and 6, that God is the provider, and the psalmist is blessed because he's following. He's blessed because the Lord is a shepherd. He can be content, he shall not want. We go back to the beginning of the psalm, we go to the end of the psalm, he says, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all my days, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. He's following, he's dwelling, and that's another topic you could go into, the dwelling, abiding in God. So that might be one way that you could outline the psalm. You could teach the psalm in a group context, as far as looking at Psalms 22 through 24. Psalm 22, you're seeing the sufferer, and Jesus certainly portrayed, quoted in the New Testament as applicable to Jesus. Psalm 23, while not as direct, Jesus certainly followed the concept of trusting in God. So where he was the sufferer here in Psalm 22, he follows the shepherd in Psalm 23, and you can certainly talk about how Jesus is the shepherd that had been foreordained from before the foundation of the world, and he is the lamb who was slain before the foundation of the world. Other lesson applications and approaches. And then Psalm 24, you find the ascension of Jesus to his throne. Some people apply that, at least it applies by its principle that's presented there. Lift up your heads, all you gates. Prepare for the King to enter in his glory. And Jesus is King now today. So that might be one way that you teach this psalm. Or you might teach about shepherds in general. Research ancient shepherds and how the practice hasn't changed by and large. It's a fenceless kind of shepherding, typically. There will be pens for the sheep to be in, where sometimes a shepherd will sit in the way so that he can tell when sheep go in and sheep go out. And you'd want to compare that then to John 10, and if you tie it in with how God talks about himself as a shepherd, in Isaiah chapter 40, verses 10 and 11, God's strength of his arm, he's going to shepherd by his arm in Isaiah 53 is Jesus when you look at it. Whenever you look at Isaiah 44, you find that Cyrus is one of the shepherds chosen by God, but in a different way. And in Isaiah, let's see, I've got it written down here. 56, he talks about poor leaders, poor shepherds. Ezekiel 34 is rich in talking about poor leaders, bad shepherds, and God is going to send a good shepherd. In John 10, Jesus is the good shepherd. And being the perfect example of a good shepherd, we see he's held up as the standard. Peter, who certainly had his shortcomings later on in life as a shepherd and elder in the church, and he talks about Jesus as the chief shepherd, and he himself follows as an under shepherd in 1 Peter chapter 5. Certainly a lot of good things for us to look at. When you're looking at it, you can see parallels that are necessitated in the life of a shepherd, that whenever those are manifested in the character of a Christian, they show the qualities that are required in someone to lead the Lord's people. Have a great day. Let's grow in those shepherding capabilities together. Great being with you.
Thank you for tuning in to Man in the Morning, presented by TITUS Camp.